So today's discussion is with Professor Majid Sharifi from Eastern Washington University. He's an Iranian-American professor of international politics. He's an author. He's done incredible work all throughout his career. And of course, he has covered not just the geopolitical situation of the region broadly, but also has covered Iran extensively, specifically. And so I wanted to speak with the professor today for our audience to gain a deeper understanding of what is currently taking place in Iran. Obviously, we're all aware that Israel carried out an attack and they are continuing to attack. And there is this looming, impending doom of another American war in the Middle East. Donald Trump was moments away of declaring war on Iran just yesterday. Many people believed that the attack would come overnight. Thankfully, it did not. And it seems as though Trump is hesitating, one, because Iran has not collapsed as Israel was hoping with their initial blitz, and also because of the fact that MAGA, the Make America Great Again conservative movement that is opposed to more war in the Middle East, has been attacking Trump relentlessly over social media, as we have seen by influential podcasters like the Hodge twins and, of course, Tucker Carlson, who just recently interviewed Ted Cruz and really humiliated him in exposing how little Ted Cruz knows about Iran and how catastrophic this war would be. And it just revealed how ignorant Ted Cruz is and how he isn't even considering how destructive this war would be, not just for the United States, but for Iran and the region as a whole. It would be more chaos, more destruction, and all at the behest of a settler colonial apartheid state, aka Israel. So, Professor, thank you for being here. I wanted to ask you, as someone who is from Iran, has family in Iran, recently was just in Iran, if you could explain to us how the people reacted and what the feeling is now. Have you spoken to your family members, your friends, your neighbors? What can you tell us about the current situation?
Since the start of these events, I have not been in touch with anyone in Iran except perhaps my sister and the family, immediate family, who are not in Tehran, who don't live in Tehran. So I don't have a good feeling of what people are thinking about, but through, again, connections and connections over connections, not direct experience, says obviously I can see that there is a rallying around the flag. And I see that even people that are against the regime, for whatever reason, they have come around to understand the difference between the regime and the violation of Iranian sovereignty and, and the bad intention of actors involved, including US and obviously Israel.
So this to me sounds like a very positive development in terms of Iran being able to defend their sovereignty. We've seen videos and pictures online of the I don't want to say the average Irani, I don't know the specific numbers, but of Iranis who obviously aren't all that religious and you could assume aren't really in support of the current government and their policies, domestically at least. But we've seen, women, young women without the headscarf flicking off Netanyahu in Israel and cursing them for attacking them. There was a video of a young Irani man tattooed in Persian symbolism who also, condemned those Iranis outside of the country that were celebrating the attack on Iran. So this, to me, is reassuring me, because if the people of Iran can rally around their government and set aside their differences in order to prepare for this potentially long-term fight against Israel and maybe even the United States, then it just gives greater confidence that, they can survive this. And they've obviously survived so much in the past. So what do you make? Is this a positive development in your mind as well?
I don't know about positive or negative, but it's a natural development. It's been historically like that. We saw the same thing in Iraq. We saw the same thing in Afghanistan. The initial strike usually gathers a few people that do not have that much roots in Iran, and they are, as a very famous Iranian scholar said, they are intoxicated, meaning they are mesmerized, they are hypnotized, they are seduced by the power and glory of the West, and they may be very happy initially, but even them, once the bombs start dropping on their homes and their relatives and their streets and their infrastructure and the suffering of the people, then they say, oh, wow, maybe this is not really what I thought. And this is exactly what happened now. This is exactly what happened 44 years ago when Iraq attacked Iran. And of course, initially, before the Iraqi-Iraq attack, Iranians were not united around the regime, but then they became united. And as you know, Iran lost 500,000 people and they never lost. And at the time, again, it was the same thing. The West plus the Soviet Union of the time, plus, of course, all of the Arabian Gulf, Arabian oil monarchies, I should call them, in the Persian Gulf and all that, they, in fact, supported Iraq. And what happened? They lost. They lost. And I think the elites in Washington, they see everything on a period news cycle, 24 hours, 48 hours, sometimes a month, short vision. But in the long term, this is not beneficial to Iranians, definitely destruction. Nobody will welcome that. It's not beneficial to the region, and it is not beneficial to the world, including the United States. And in the long term, I predict that it would be horrible, even for Israel.
Many people were critical of Iran over the last 2 years, kind of hesitating to be more assertive. In short, people, felt that they were being weak, and that weakness would invite aggression. And then we saw the Reformist Party, I guess through Pezeshkian, coming to power, or coming to office, I should say, as the president. And many people were critical of him and the other reformers for seeking negotiations with the United States. They thought this was naive. How could Iran ever trust this again? But it was obvious that, Iran has to do something in order to get those sanctions lifted, because everyday people are suffering. I saw that myself in Iran. I mean, it was still a beautiful country, infrastructure, self-sustainable. Everyone had everything they needed, but you really feel like there's a roof over your head and you can't go higher than the ceiling because of these sanctions. So they, pursued these negotiations, and it kind of blew up in their face, literally. But I want to know what you think, how we got to this situation, because I feel that at least now the Irani government can show their people, and the younger generation specifically, maybe that are disconnected from the revolution and these chants of, America being the great Satan, and of course all the other things that we hear, the revolution slogan say. It seems as though now they can show their people, look, we tried in good faith to do what you've been asking us to do, which is to ease tensions with the West and get these sanctions lifted. And look how they punished us for it. And now you see their true nature. So what do you make of the situation? How did we get here? Why is this happening?
Well, I think I buy you into your premise, and it is that the bad faith negotiation that occurred actually strengthened the hardline vision that had existed in Iran for a long, long time. And the argument is very clear. The people within the regime that are saying, let's just modify, let's negotiate, let's moderate, let's live and live with U.S. and the West and all of that. And then the hardliners are saying that, in fact, the more you give, the more they want. And in practical terms, U.S. proves that through its hypocrisy, through its lies, deceptions, tough talk, that hardliners are actually have a better sense of what America is all about, which is all about power. And of course, it's a shame in a sense. I wish it wasn't like that, but it is true. It is true that, again, I want to go back to history. Hardliner also won back in the Iraq-Iran war. And hardliner have won because of, not because they probably have a better project for Iran, but because usually the West shut down the door of the gate of negotiation and reform. And we are here right now. We are here, and nobody likes that, but we are here. And I can only blame it on Trump administration. The fact that they were negotiating in good faith, they didn't even wait to end that negotiation. This is horrible. This is criminal intent.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. And it seems like it's definitely going to reinforce the hardliner position. And right now, maybe that's what Iran needs. Iran needs to take a hardline position in order to defend itself and reestablish deterrence. I I was very worried that the United States would get involved sooner. I don't know exactly how they'd get involved, but it was clear to me that in the lead up to this, that the walls, it kind of seemed like the walls were closing in. You know, they were picking off or degrading members of the Axis that make up Iran's really their only allies in the region. They don't really have state allies. I don't really perceive their negotiations with Saudi Arabia as being genuine or authentic. I think it's clear the Gulf monarchies are much closer to Israel and the United States than they'll ever be to Iran, despite the fact that Iran is, you know, powerful and can threaten their oil rigs and are right off the coast with them. But it seems to me like there was this intent, obviously, to produce regime change. But now that that has clearly failed, what do you think happens next? What can Iran do to really make clear that they're not going to tolerate these threats any longer? Do they need to close the Strait of Hormuz? Do they need to escalate further themselves? Do you think that they're doing a good enough job already in terms of attacking Israel and putting pressure on them? What do you make of the situation?
Well, two things. First, the distinction between hardliner and reformers is two debate, two worldview, and those two worldviews. I'm not necessarily one for the idea of hardliners are focusing on power, absolute power, and power talks and power practical. This is the world we live in, which we live right now. Have power, and if you have coercive power, you can create other types of power. This is what we call in international relations realist. But even realism is beyond that. I mean, you can't even really theorize it why U.S. would want an ally like Israel. But that's beside the point. The fact is that the world of power and the struggle for power, and it's always conflicting. There is no peace. So there are people like myself and millions of people, and I bet you even, and everybody else. We are imagining a different world, a world where we can live in peace, especially regional peace. There is no conflict between between Iran and Saudi Arabia and the other Arab countries and the Muslim world. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a conflict with Israel. But the problem is that the external forces, US and its allies, are making this world impossible. And it's sad to say that. So when I say this preface to say that I confirm your opinion that unfortunately hardliners are becoming more practical. This is a practicality or the pragmatic in a sense. Practicality and pragmatism and realism is type of realism that we all hate. We all hate. And so saying that, now going to the second part of your question as far as closing the Hormuz Strait, I think this really depends on Trump and US. If they escalate it, right now it seems to me, and nobody can predict, and things can be escalate out of control. But it seems to me that Iran would be content to go to a war of attrition with Israel, knowing that it can survive it and it can actually destroy Israel little by little. Now, US is backing Israel, but as long as US is not directly using its equipment to attack Iran, I think Iran would stay back and keep that option open. So when I say it's up to the Trump administration, it's because if they trigger it, if they want to just walk into this direct, they are involved, but even more involved, then it becomes a situation like Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine knows that U.S. is backing you. I mean, Russia knows that U.S. is backing Ukraine, but they go so far. And once they get that past that red line, anything is possible. I think Iran would be left with no choice but attacking all the Iranian base, all the U.S. bases, Strait of Hormuz, and everything else it can.
What do you think about the negotiations to eliminate enrichment entirely within the country of Iran? Do you think that the Irani government should insist upon this position?
Let me say something about first what we talked about regime change. First of all, there is no plan for regime change right now. There is a plan for regime collapse, and regime collapse and regime change is two different things. We don't have any alternative in Iran for regime change. There are no plan. There is no strategy. So the intention is to create a Syria situation for the last 11 years. There was no intention to replace the Assad regime because there was no alternative until Assad. But right now, the whole idea is to make the regime collapse, which would be disastrous in the long term. Disastrous for Iranians, for Iraqis, for everyone in the region. Not necessarily good, but horrible for everyone except for Israel. This is one thing. The Iranian regime cannot, again, it would lead to its collapse and its discredibility to back off from this position. And this position is not a position that they can sustain because given the circumstances, the mistrust and the distrust, and the way the Trump administration has, in fact, in general, not the Trump, US administrations, previous ones too, have dealt with Iran, there is no trust. Let's assume for a second that the Iranian regime wanted to actually say, okay, we're going to give up enrichment for the next 10 years. Let's just do that until we assure you that we are not going for nuclear weapon. Let's do that. Let's assume that. Will that be the last step they need to take? No, that would be the beginning of the end. Because the next thing is they're going to ask them for the missiles, then their weapons. They're going to go down a step by a step to create a situation in which that they have no other choice. We saw that in the case of Iraq. You remember, in the case of Iraq, Iraq gave up everything it had to give up. And then, of course, they weakened it and then they attacked it. Iranians see that. Iranians are not, they're as intelligent as anyone else. It's stupid for them to actually give up their enrichment. Not like this, not with this regime, not this with rhetoric, not this with philosophy.
This is why I felt like war was inevitable the entire time, because of what you just said, that Iran, the government, the regime, whatever you want to call it, would lose credibility with the people. They would lose face with the people if they were to backtrack off this issue. I mean, they've experienced sanctions for over a decade, maybe, well, since the beginning of the revolution, really, but the sanctions have been increased and intensified because of the nuclear program. So after all this time to then basically abandon it, you not only do you look weak, but you also look foolish. Like, why did you make us all suffer if you were going to give it up in the first place? So it felt to me like Witkoff, who is a Zionist, is, pro-Israel Jew. He is best friends with Netanyahu. The Mossad gave Witkoff a golden pager, and celebrating, of course, their pager attack against Hezbollah. And Witkoff carries that around with him. He did an interview with The Atlantic, and he shared that. Yeah. So this man, who is the Middle East envoy, is supposed to be leading the negotiations. And by the way, he's not a diplomat. He's never led any negotiations ever other than signing real estate deals. So he's not a professional diplomat. He's obviously Israel's guy. And he's only in that position because Trump knew him throughout his life and they're friends. And Trump just operates in that way because he's a doofus. But basically, Witkoff, as this pro-Israel guy, is giving Iran something they can't agree to. And so do you think that the intent from the very beginning for the United States was to produce this war? That there was never any intent, not even a modicum of intention? Like, if, let's say, like you said, if you give them, they take more. So let's say they agreed to give up enrichment. Would the United States then have said okay, or do you think they would have moved the goalpost again?
Well, your question, my good friend, assumes that U.S. has a strategy. U.S. doesn't. Right now, U.S. is a colony from foreign policy perspective, especially in the Middle East, U.S. is a colony of Israel. It's the tail that wags the dog. And in that sense, Netanyahu and his gang, his criminal gangs, were pretty much, which Witkoff is a part of them, you're right. And the Israeli lobby in U.S. actually have sabotaged every negotiation. U.S. should be ashamed of itself. I am an American citizen for many decades. I am ashamed to say that as an American, I can see that this great country is being dominated by the Zionist criminal gang in Israel. And we see that. We see that the U.S. has no more credibility. They just they killed the person who was negotiating with them. Of course, how can you possibly conclude that this was a good faith negotiation? And this is not the first time. The Iranian regime has experienced that back from 1980s when they entered negotiation in the so-called Algeria treaty. That U.S. backed from it immediately. During 2015, the minute Obama, the next day after Obama signed that GOCP, U.S. imposed sanction on Iran. It has never been good faith. And it's difficult. It's difficult. So I just want to say, yes, I agree, but I would say that I would blame this one on the weaknesses of this administration for not having long-term strategy and for really, this is Israel first. This is not America first administration. This is Israel first. And there are some voices, like you said, called a few voices of MAGA that, as you properly said it, that are want to make it America first, but they can't even do that. This is utter incompetence on the part of Washington to lose this one, because Iran could provide a great ally with the United States. They could consume $200-300 billion a year from American products. They don't need to be, and they don't have to be. They're not inherently against U.S. allies in the Persian Gulf. They could create a better situation for U.S. Even from a U.S. imperialistic view, this is stupid. This is stupid not only for, this is horrible for the region, but it's stupid from even from an imperialist. This is a stupid imperialist project because it's going to fail.
So you mentioned earlier you did an excellent job creating a distinction between regime change and regime collapse. So speaking of a potential collapse, which at this point, thankfully, it seems like is not going to happen. However, it seems like Israel is riding a little too high off their recent success over the last 2 years, which is undeniable. They obviously are, we don't want to present genocide as a success. Obviously, it's a horrible thing. But from their perspective, they're about to dump the people of Gaza and ethnically cleanse it. They have degraded Hezbollah. Hezbollah said, we're not going to agree to a ceasefire until Gaza gets one. They agreed to a ceasefire. They said, we'll never retreat behind the Litani River. They retreated behind the Litani River. Israel still occupies and bombs portions of Lebanon at will. And now, Hezbollah is severely wounded and they can't really assert themselves at this moment in time. They have managed to survive the Red Sea blockade because the axis of assistance, as Max Blumenthal likes to call them, the Arab states, they've been helping them get around the Red Sea blockade through the overland routes. And then, of course, they were able to topple Bashar al-Assad in Syria. So their logic is, we decapitated the leadership in Lebanon and Hezbollah, and we killed all the men until we got to the man who was willing to negotiate with us on our terms. And we were able to weaken Syria through sanctions and constant bombing and killing of their leaders and generals, et cetera, et cetera. They collapsed. So they are acting on this plan thinking, we succeeded there, we can succeed in Iran. After seeing so many dozens of IRGC generals killed and nuclear scientists, and it's obvious they're trying to take out high-level professors and AI researchers and just eliminate Irani talent the way they've done in Gaza and other places, Do you feel that Iran can withstand that in the long term? Do you think that strategy of multi-layered decapitation will work?
Yeah, I can't predict the future. Obviously, nobody can. But I hate to. Well, it's really difficult to predict whether Iranian regime going to collapse or not. But it is delusional to think that killing a few generals here and there going to eliminate the military. It's stupid, delusional, crazy to think that killing a few scientists, and especially scientists that were retired already, they were not necessarily in charge of the everyday routine technical things. It's gonna kill that program. That program is institutionalized in the minds of tens of thousands of people. Iran has become an exporter of mind and brain. It's a brain, exporter in a sense. And they have many, many layers that can't be killed. The right now, the situation that they created with the idea of hate and resentment against Israel, this will not gonna go away. Not for the next 10 years, not yet next for 20 years. There is no way any leader can come to Iran and say, okay, we are friends of America, we are friends of Israel. It just won't happen. It will not happen. I don't care unless they rule by dictatorial, authoritarian things, but then policing people and all that, which is impossible, impractical in in things. So, in my opinion, the regime collapse. It may happen. It may happen. I'm not saying 100%, but it's kind of impossible. Not impossible, but it's improbable. I should say.
So it's a possibility, but it's an improbability. It's highly
Yes.
unlikely at this point
Yes.
because, as you've pointed out, now they have for an entire generation spoiled the perception of both Israel and the United States.
Yes, and
So
the longer this goes on, the worse it's going to get. And let's just say Iranian regime has maybe 10% or 15% of the population. They are faithful, loyal. It's more than, of course, Trump administration can talk about, or any Western country, including Israel. And with that, they can mobilize 4 or 5 million people. There is no other force in Iran that can mobilize that many people. Still, up to today, and this is going to increase. This is going to backfire for the long term on U.S. They lost Iraq. They lost Afghanistan. You know it. They were there for 20 years, and the ragtag army of the Taliban, who collapsed and left Kabul in an hour and a half, you see that they came back to defeat this empire.
yes, that's
Destruction is easy. Construction and extracting resources from Iran the way they intend to do or they like to do, it will be impossible. This is a lose-lose game for Iranians, for US, for the region.
that's an excellent point. I don't want to say push back, but I do want to inject a little bit of pessimism if I can, because as you described it, it's a lose-lose game. From Israel's perspective, even if the regime doesn't collapse, if they can just instigate conflict and weaken Iran, from their perspective, it's a victory, unless they are completely destroyed in exchange. Because their whole, what is this all about, really? As you said, this is an Israel first war. What Israel wants to do is cement their hegemony and either destroy or severely weaken the only force in the region that's actually opposed to them, both publicly and not just through rhetoric and discourse, but through action, as we've seen through the proxies that are have been attacking them. I don't want to say proxies. A lot of people get upset about that, but you know what I mean, semi-proxies, I suppose, non-state allies of Iran like Hezbollah and Ansarullah. They're not proxies. They exist for their own reasons in their own context, but obviously they have a very close relationship with Iran. From their perspective, it would be nice, it seems, just to weaken Iran. But I want to ask you, since we were on the topic of potential regime collapse or the intent to produce that, what happens if they assassinate the Ayatollah?
That would be the worst thing that could possibly happen to Israel because
Why?
Ayatollah is the only, probably not the only, but certainly the most prominent leader of Iran who has stood firm and strong against producing a nuclear weapon. If it wasn't for Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran would have weaponized nuclear weapon 20 years ago, and they would have done it. The theory was there, the idea was there, but he has stood against it. If he dies or if he gets killed, the next generation, the not younger generation, are more radical, and they will produce. And that's the talk in Iran right now. They will produce the nuclear weapon, and Iran has the capability to do it. So this is going to backfire again. It's going to backfire in that sense if they kill Ayatollah, or even if he naturally dies under the circumstances. Israel, in the long term, I am not optimistic about what is going on, but I am more pessimistic about the fate of Israel. Israel is creating more and more and more enemies in the world. It's on its way. Right now, the Israelis, which a huge majority of them have double or three passports, two or three passports. They want to get out. They can't. The ticket out of Tel Aviv is $250 to $500,000, leaving by yachts.
Wow.
Wow. They're not in a good situation. They cannot. Collapse of Iran would not be security for Israel. It would be security, temporary security for criminal Netanyahu who wants to avoid going to prison. But
so in a way, it seems Iran is actually, on the face of it, it seemed like Iran was the vulnerable state, potentially susceptible to collapse. But it seems like the opposite, that Israel and its hubris, thinking they could put pressure on them, could produce their own collapse.
The government of Netanyahu, less than a week before the attack on Iran, almost collapsed. What saved them was one or two representatives.
Right, they had that last second deal to save the government.
Yes, and this government collapses. There are forces in Israel that have finally understood that this is playing with fire. No Israeli can go to Turkey, to Egypt, to Europe. They're not safe anywhere. They have created a situation for themselves that is not really a great thing. They don't understand it. Are they stupid? This is going to backfire, and it has already backfired. But we'll see what the future says. Netanyahu thinks he can force himself, coerce and kill his way through the region and the country, inside and outside. But this is not going to be sustainable. Let me just add this, at the risk of talking too much. Israel is surrounded by Jordan. 60% of the population, as you know better than I, are Palestinian. It's not a stable country. Egypt is a palace built on ice. It may collapse any time. Question of 100 million, over 100 million people. Whoever comes to power can't be pro-Israeli. Syria is the same. Despite the idea, and you and I know that Syria internally, how they feel about what's going on. Iraq, we know what's going on in Iraq. Whether they're Sunni or Shia, it doesn't really matter. Their stand against Israel is clear. Saudi Arabia, even though, as you said, may just help Israel and is a better ally of US than Iran at this point in time, but the population is not that. The populations are pro-Iranian. If not pro-Iranian, certainly anti-Israel. And of course goes to Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the rest of the countries. This is not a good long-term situation from a sociological, psychological, historical perspective for the very existence of Israel.
I want to ask you lastly, do you think Iran should have made a nuclear weapon? And moving forward, do you think they should do it now?
Well, I don't know. From a moral perspective, I'm against the use of any weapon of mass destruction. But it doesn't matter really what I think. It matters that what's the reality on the ground. And I think the Iranian regime will, if this continues, if there is not a good compromise on the side of US and Trump administration, if there is no compromise, Iranian regime will have nuclear weapons.
Professor, at the start of this, I believe I mispronounced your name because of the way I have it saved in my phone. And I've been calling you professor and like uncle basically as a term of endearment. So I haven't really, pronounced your name appropriately. Can you pronounce it now so the audience is aware?
Yeah, Majid Sharifi.
Sharifi, Majid Sharifi. I think I said Shakiri. I apologize for that. But Professor, next time I'd like to bring you on so we can talk more about the books that you've written. You've covered international relations and politics and geopolitics for many years. You've built your entire career on that, and you've had a lot of success doing so. So we'd love to have you back on in order to discuss that in more detail. And you and I have discussed privately, potentially collaborating together on a documentary idea that you have. And so I look forward to collaborating with you further, and I hope we can have you on again.
Thank you so much, and have a great day.
You too, Professor. Thank you.